season 5 of Simply Stated here on YouTube with Double KC. It's important to remember that if you like my other stuff that's more fun, the Simply Eating and Simply Yoga, that's all on OnlyFans at Double KTBORHKY. So please enjoy that whenever you would like to subscribe for it. So, but getting into this episode is me. I'm filming down here actually in Elk Rapids live today. There will be a new season, a new show coming soon called Simply Stated, and it's literally going to be just the odds. So as far as like the show material and all of that, I finally came to the conclusion that trying to do these shows that are so sequential had to end, and it had to be more the odds and the ends. Now it feels like there needs to be more of there just simply needs to be more of almost like the bizarro logic and just the odds, because a lot of things haven't ended that were supposed to. So, and for me, frankly, it's getting too frustrating to keep trying to make a show where I don't have enough time to look up every little detail. I expect an audience that's been with me for the previous shows, that's been building and growing with me, or maybe you actually used to read my old blog and know about all the different difficulties I had when I was living in Washington, D.C. with Doug Fleming and Frederick Steiner, who'd been hired by Booz Allen Hamilton after joining Chiefs of Staff told me to start that blog, began hacking on a regular basis on behalf of the Russian FSB and Chinese CCP because I was trying to get away from a couple that had actually killed my parents. So anyways, we will be having a show going forward that's going to be just a lot more of the odds. Because it seems like it's the odds that actually have to be talked about. Anyways, so this season, I really hope you've enjoyed it. I've taken a lot of requests and done as much as I could with it. It is an international show. It talks a lot about issues in the U.S. that are very honest and what actually needs to be said, as opposed to like what somebody would have paid to put out in a press release. It's important to note that I am certified public relations from UVA. I graduated from a program that only accepts 10% of applicants at UVA, and only 5% actually graduate. So I'm literally in the top of a program that literally almost no one ever gets into or graduates from. So anyways, here's the thing. So this is going to be a really quick summary, episode 37 of Simply Stated, season 5, odds and ends. And it's important to start with this one and note that it's actually about we're going to start with talking about some recent news that some of you may have not caught up with, which is that, as you know, Tulsi Gabbard agreed to go ahead with what was essentially an attack on the state of Hawaii. Not a continental U.S., it's actually an island. And for those of you who don't know what that exactly means, she went for a setup with Christopher Wray, who used to run the FBI, to simply attack Hawaii and simply allow Oprah Winfrey and a whole bunch of people tied with Endeavor Corp, the Chinese CCP, and the Russian FSB to acquire a huge amount of land there. It was an attack that was planned out back in the 80s. It wasn't actually acceptable to go through with. And the reason why I want to note that for you is that extreme planning had to be gone forward with for the state of Hawaii to stop them from continuing to simply grab up and suck up all the people's land. So, anyways, what I'm saying at this point is that you need to note something that happened recently in Waikiki because, and this is especially weird, Tulsi Gabbard's brother was actually arrested for pedophilia and child sexual assault trafficking in Hawaii within the last 24 hours. So why that's important for you is to know that this is a person who literally went off on a strategy that she wasn't supposed to have, wasn't supposed to use. I actually specifically asked her to do defense playing against it, went forward with it, and the actual United States government and the actual people of the U.S. had to organize to keep her from simply seizing Hawaii and giving it to China, or even to the Russian FSB, or something else equally weird. And now her brother has actually been found in the state of Hawaii being a pervert with kids and been arrested by the Hawaiian police in Waikiki. Yeah, so and this is a person who literally knew about a child that I had or thought I had that had deliberately wanted to be sent off to be trafficked by the name of Franklin Silver. So it's a child predator and a nasty freak that works for a private company. When people make weird jokes about how there is no intel in U.S. intel, that's what they mean. This is the person who is charged of intel for the Trump administration. And I hope it's actually been finally removed. Going forward, I'm going to review for you a book. I have to review the book. Because for the people who actually know the history of what I went through back in Dubuque, Iowa, up to the present, because it was actually changed as an artist and a geisha, I also went through a bunch of child trafficking myself in the 80s in Dubuque, Iowa, and then went through a whole bunch of other weird events after that, trying to get away from these crazy people that had murdered my mom and also murdered my dad, and really killed other people I've been friends with. They're from the Russian FSB, but also in relationship with the Chinese CCP and the Shining Path. Okay? Just Iowa's butthole. One thing I want to revisit for you with media and issues with media as far as what Endeavor Corp was founded on. It was a project for Putin that Patrick Witzel founded, who is also a psychiatric patient here in the U.S., to literally create obfuscation and bizarre material. And one thing he did, because the Chinese CCP hates Japan, was to have the book Memoirs of a Geisha written, which essentially was the details of a woman who was essentially a Japanese prostitute, who I think, she's supposed to be Japanese, she sounded actually be like a Chinese or Russian whore, basically. It had nothing to do with the actual artistic geishas of Japan. Whereas those of us who were actually in geisha schools, who were trained as artists in the 80s and 90s, had to be compared to her, and were interrogated for this. I was actually interrogated and beat up on by booze on him contractors from Russia and China. Because in the 2000s, early 2010s in the U.S., Russia and China were literally allowed to be a part of every U.S. investigation. So you'd come to a conclusion investigation here with whoever they're working with jointly, whether it was also Russia, China, and Russia and China would come and mess the whole thing up if they didn't agree with it because it didn't go with their dumb bullshit principles. They also were still inviting in people from the Khmer Rouge and the Shining Path, even in the early 2010s. And one of the issues was that this book was actually written to be really offensive and rude, and they would reference it and talk about how geisha, Japanese geisha trained artists were just whores. Because when you read the story of Memoirs of Geisha, it talks about a woman who does nothing but look for a man to be married to, and she's frankly a pervert. It's really all it was. And she sleeps around, and she's extremely bitchy and weird and a borderline. And then towards the end of the book, she has a fight with another woman who's a borderline, and they burn down what was essentially a whorehouse. And when I interviewed people from Japan, I thought about what I knew of the people of Japan and my experience being trained as an art school, geisha art school when I was a kid, is that some people would have seen the woman who simply burned the place down as the hero. The truth is they were both whores who got in terrible fights, and that the entire premise of the book of her being focused on simply getting married to some weird dumb guy, or just finding a guy to take care of her instead of focusing on what geisha art is actually supposed to be about, is completely ridiculous. It was meant to be insulting. Much like the way The Ring was meant to be insulting to the Japanese, and especially insulting to Yoko Ono herself after the death of John Lennon. It's important to remember all this because that's why you don't trust Hollywood, because Hollywood has been mostly taken over by people from Russia and China. The reason I went ahead and started all these alternative projects here in the U.S. was so people would have something simply different to consume. You want to talk about population health? I worked in population health issues with people with neurocognitive disorders over the age of 60 in the Washington, D.C. area for a Fortune 400 company. I had a security clearance through HHS intelligence and many background checks. And I am telling you, so many little old people in this country, especially people with cognitive disorders or neurocognitive disorders or head injuries, are set off by these kinds of materials. It's very confusing and gross. And I can't think of anything more disgusting or weird than the Memoirs of a Geisha film, which Patrick Witzel himself went out of his way to produce and have made and insult them on purpose. Because he was in the middle of trafficking myself, who was actually trained at a geisha art school for hundreds of millions of dollars. But also in the process of actually just continuing to have this bizarre feud, because apparently killing John Lennon wasn't enough. And it's not over. These groups aren't under control in the U.S. Hoover College, his school, today still mounts terrorist attacks in the U.S. on behalf of the Shining Path, the Khmer Rouge, the Chinese CCP, and the Russian FSB. You simply have to be aware. You have to be. Because they get jobs on police forces. Endeavor does. Timothy McVeigh still has jobs on U.S. police forces today. He has to get fired pretty regularly or run off. I'm not saying all cops are bad. I'm saying you need to know what's going on. Because it's been a consistent issue all over the U.S. When I lived in Arlington, Virginia in the 2000s, one of the reasons I was trafficked so horribly was because there were too many cops who had been installed by Endeavor Corp onto the police force. That's why there was all that nasty labor trafficking in Arlington, Virginia in the 2000 to 2010 range. You wonder why Lisa Rodugno got killed? That's why. You wonder what happened to Ala Cushing? That's why. They couldn't get help from the actual police force there. Yes, a certain number of us survived, but we literally survived by things no one wants to imagine. And I often wonder what the two of them, if they simply decide to kill themselves between the weird barrage and insults in the U.S. media. Because what I'm saying is that the Russia FSB and Chinese CCP spend a huge amount of time and money making nasty pieces of material to insult you, and sometimes to personally insult you and target people as victims. And they will send it directly to your home, either through deepfakes or through literally. There was a big issue. You can't get away from it. It was bad everywhere. It was shown. It was obviously a horribly racist film. So, anyways, going from here, I need to also note for you that one thing that concerns me, and it's still an issue today, and it seems to be really obvious in the way our current president is behaving, is that Russia and China were our allies barely in World War II, but they were considered to be false allies. One of the issues I struggled with, and I still see today, is that there are people who still think of them as our allies here in the U.S., even people in the 20s and 30s, and they're not. And we have a media that seems to both go with it and cover it up. Here's the reality. There is no reason for us to have anything to do with Russia and China, countries that are totally opposite of us, or to want to know what to do with anything with them. Recently here in the U.S., there was frankly an attack, what turned out to be a bombing here in Northern America, after the President of the U.S. got mad at the Canadian Prime Minister. Literally less than 24 hours later, what sounded like a bomb went off in either Canada or the boundary waters of the U.S., northern U.S. Smoke all over the place, especially there, all the way down to Virginia, all the way over to New York, several states, more than several states. And instead of being there for us as a country, our president, Donald Trump, was off in China to do what? Comfort the Chinese and say, there, he did it. He managed to ruin the part of the U.S. that most Americans who are actually from the country go to for a vacation during this time of year. It's ridiculous. Apparently, Donald Trump is currently having some weird fight with the Italian Prime Minister and constantly insulting her and sexually harassing her. I'm sorry, he actually travels around the U.S. doing that to random women who don't even have specific titles. I'm not here as an apology to her. I'm just saying that that's Italy's Prime Minister can handle whatever she wants, but that's actually his personality. Hillary Clinton was completely useless to us in the past. I'm not a Democrat, but she was totally useless in the system because she's a neocon and actually supports this behavior, and that's why she acted so stupidly in debates, by the way. Right back 8 years ago, 10 years ago. It's important to note that there are way too many actors from the Russian GRU that have been relevantly free up here in the northwest coast of Michigan. I don't know where else they're traveling to, but the Traverse City Airport is international, so that means they could literally go back and forth to Russia within a stop. You keep it in mind if you live up here in Michigan or anywhere else in the country. Just check your local airport. There's apparently some kind of weird tax scam, but somebody making weird phone calls all over the place, asking everybody that they assisting for tax money and back taxes to people who don't actually owe any back tax money. So yeah, know your scams, know your weird, spammy, fishy, your weird fished. I think some people call it spoofed calls. They're also called vished calls. Phishing is the emails that are fake. So I need to note that, yeah. So President Trump currently in a weird fight with Giorgia Meloni. Don't have any money to help you, Italy, but I'm also not going to support Donald Trump if you decide you want to attack him over it. So, yeah. There's a lot of things you can do in this life as a leader, and one of them is not sexually harass female prime ministers. That's actually not funny. It's really not cool to provoke another country into attacking us by doing that. Yeah. Let's see, you need to remember that Katie Couric planned to make her husband, who was actually Representative Jim Nussle, a U.S. Senator, Majority Leader. She actually thought with all the setups with Senator John Thune that he would either come into power because he's allied with them as a neocon and a member of the Russian FSB, the old KGB, or that she would simply have Jim Nussle as a Senate Majority Leader, which is why she engaged in so much ridiculous behavior. So you need to remember she's over at NBC, which is basically Moscow News, right? Just remember, I don't know if we're going to do anything actually with the old established media outlets. NBC, ABC, CBS, because all of that was from the days when the U.S. was still I mean, anything from the 1940s and on would have been aligned with the old KGB. And they haven't actually changed. That's why you have so many weird gangbangers in U.S. media. And then when you had CNN and Fox try to spin off and develop, they've struggled to keep people who are literal gangbangers out. And what I mean by that is the Russian FSB's main playbook has always been to run gangs. They run all the gangs, actually. They have relationships with all the gangs. And the Chinese CCP likes drugs, so they like all the gangs too. And people as slaves, so it kind of goes together. I have to note for you that Senator Mitch McConnell went into a coma last month. It's definitely just, I would say it's just like what happened to Ariel Sharon in the 2000s. For those of you who remember some of my stories, I was actually stuck working for Adam Kinzinger at the time, but Ariel Sharon was attacked and then put into a coma and later taken off life support. And what's important to note is that he went by the name Tim Hathaway, the Hathaway Group, which was in Alexandria, Virginia at the time, in 2005, 2006 era. And the reason I want you to understand all of this is because, as far as I know, Adam Kinzinger is still free. He also went by the name Terry Lane, but at the time he got out of me that I was just going to be done with Israel after what happened to Ariel Sharon, the fact that he wasn't supported in his leadership of the country. I did identify Daniel Fry as somebody who went to GOP meetings and went back and forth to Israel and actually got in fights with people. And actually caused conflict, and actually there's direct footage of him being in the area at the time and going after Ariel Sharon. And he claimed to be Jewish, but he's actually Russian. He's actually Ashkenazi Russian. So, not part of any decent group. It's important to note that also one of Cersei's specializations working for the Russian FSB is that she worked for hate groups in Israel and Russia. And remember, she went by the name Anna Popov, so she's from the Popov family. No, I don't. I finally figured out something for you. Michael Keating is actually also Terry Lane. And he was also Adam Kinzinger. That's what actually happened in the end. So if we're comparing who this Michael Keating person was, who was so mysterious in Janesville, Wisconsin, late 90s, that's who it was. That's who it was. I finally managed to put the four of them together. And then he's also appeared as George W. Bush. And there's strong evidence for people to think that George W. Bush, the actual George W. Bush, was actually killed in 9/11. And this person simply replaced him. But Terry Lane is the one that's also Adam Kinzinger lies, claims to be a member of the U.S. Air Force, and he's not. He actually just works for Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a Russian and Chinese company that specifically does defense issues for them. For them, not for the U.S. And they have offices all over the U.S. and equipment here. So, it's unfortunate to say that Senator John Thune eventually became majority leader in the Senate, even if it's just temporarily. But that's what's happening, is he's become the acting leader right now because Mitch McConnell has gone into this coma. And that's certainly worth being notable for you. Certainly worth you noting, because that would explain why there was no peace agreement that was supported between Israel and Iran, and that's also why your current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, thought that he had the right to go ahead and actually continue the conflict with independent contractors out of CACI and Booz Allen Hamilton, instead of following what the actual U.S. military had agreed on. And then, you got to know this stuff for yourself, otherwise you're going to be really confused. As far as where's the CIA and all this, unfortunately the CIA is actually Booz Allen Hamilton. It was sold to the company back in the 80s by H.W. Bush. No, it was not legal, but you have to understand that there is no U.S. agency that does central reporting. It was sold 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So back when I was a little kid, which is what started this mess for me, because with it came all kinds of weird setups. With it came all kinds of weird coup systems out of MS-13 that the Chinese used or even gave them. With it came this bizarre system of people simply being told that they were just supposed to put their head to their side and be raped or trafficked. It's also important to note that I want to know if you're Red McGuire, the last man to marry my mom, not legally, but in a cult setup. So he didn't have an actual legal marriage to her. She managed to save that much of herself. He ended up being part of the KKK, the KGB, and part of Peace USA, which is a fake front group church, which is full of Nazi people, but it also has a lot of Ashkenazi Jew members it supports Israel, imported from Israel, Chinese, Russian members of the Albanian terrorist groups. And it's important to note that they're now different than B'nai B'rith. And they both have a pretty active presence in Petoskey. For example, if you go to the library lately, There's some woman working there who apparently has decided it's okay to go and like spit in everyone's bags of food that they normally give away up there. She works there, and she's apparently part of B'nai B'rith. So that's the kind of dumb things they do, is go to food bank food, or food that's for people who are actually hungry, and like spit in it. It's also important to note that it was, as far as my mom's history, Jim Hickerson was a member of the Russian FSB, the old KGB, that went and had fake cancer treatment in Dubuque, Iowa in the 80s and claimed to have died, but he simply didn't. The whole marriage to my mom and all that was just literally a setup to create more trafficking. So, hi. I want to note that Lauren Sanchez has been cited in Petoskey, and she's definitely part of the Khmer Rouge, so she's extremely dangerous. And her traveling back and forth here, you're not going to want to call her out, but you need to know what she actually is. If you think there's some weird, like, pulse attacks and crap going on, yeah, she's been doing that. She's gone back to active ground war against people. She really did do a weird campaign last year with the airline that she started to create, or whatever that stupid thing was with the airplane, how she was planning to literally just get out there and start trafficking people and picking them up. And it hasn't worked out. By the way, I decided after that I hate Gal King. You should too. You actually might need to. I'm going to go ahead and put down here also to remember that Holly Berry was noted as also being Shonda Rhimes, and also I'm coming to the conclusion that Candace B is actually the same person. That they're all the actual same person. Just because, and this would also make them all also Kimberly Gill is out of Luther College in the 1998-2002 range. For those of you who are still wondering. I need to note for you that Sarah Jung Thune told me I deserve to be cut up and scorned for not being Russian or part of the setups, because I'm not KGB, and was angry because I refused to let him use his face game. So what you need to know about Senator Thune is he has a disorder with being into the face game, where he makes a face of people and kills them, and thought he was pretty cute. He thinks himself is cute as being a serial killer or something. That's what it came out of these weird stories. And I think it's also important to know that I never would have even known that it was Senator Thune that I'd been out with a couple times. All I knew from the Luther College people that were trafficking me, that they're from Devercorp and Russian, was that I simply had to go out with this guy, and I had to work really hard to simply dump him, which I did, and that there's no iteration of himself that isn't a weird idiot. He was so crazy as to try and pursue me and tell me he was, to make it known to me through other people in the U.S. government, that he was actually Senator Thune. And my response is, I just don't care. There's no iteration of this guy where he's an abusive freak. I wouldn't, on his own merit, he sucked. He was a poor guy who thought it was okay to beat me and other people. And apparently he's gotten away with killing a number of people who were not so possessed of a firm mind, you might call, or clear mind, right? Clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. That's pretty much it. I would also note, talking about the World Cup, Lalisa pretty clearly photoshopped some of her pictures recently to put herself up in black clothing. I'm going to say I'm sorry, it's too late. She very clearly already put together the white outfits that portray herself as a child predator and a fan of white parties where your mom can be raped, right? That's what they do with those. So no, putting on some black clothing now isn't going to change anything instead of previous episodes. If you think it doesn't matter, my word's actually a pretty big impact, because I really did work on some of her stuff in the past. Actually, I think we've already gone ahead and covered the problems with Adam Kinzinger, but it's important to note that he was the one who attended the school also in the 1998-2002 range. It's just be such a freaking weirdo. I do have a series up right now talking about fashion using strings on OnlyFans. It will be ending pretty soon. And I think it's really important for some of you who might be falling into strings as a fashion item. If you're not a communist, like the communist groups have already picked them up, so you may actually want to go ahead and drop that as a fashion trend. Like, I already saw a few people had started to do like almost like strings vomiting all over the place. So, but the series is on OnlyFans right now. It may have almost just ended actually. So. Let's see. Yeah, it's important to remember there's a significant issue with Heather Homan. She turned out to be a contractor for CICI, also out of MS-13, and she was a member of the Trump administration, as far as I know. She was fired from the Leadership Institute for doing too many setups on Morton Blackwell. So. who did not support her bizarre ideas as a contractor out of Russia that would simply set you or your family members up to be shot and collect money for it. If you notice, the logic is changing a lot more simple for people. That's where I'm at now. So the next season's going to be a lot more like this episode, basically. And yes, if you lived in the Washington, D.C. area in the 2010 range, you would definitely know there was a problem with Heather Hellman. She's been active in the state of Michigan. She tried to work on the MSP for a while and got fired. Yeah, I want to remind you that Erica Renee Good wasn't someone who actually needed to be killed. She was actually murdered, and it was definitely manufactured news, and that's why I do the shows. She was someone who was literally beat on, brainwashed, sent radio signals, and got out to an event and got killed. I also have to note for you that, let's see, Jane Ellison, who some of you knew at the NRSC, is actually also RuPaul, the performer. And I felt like he was somebody else. I had to go through a number of setups who actually had to actively get out of them. Was forced to spend too much time with Jen Cave in order for her to simply feel like she had someone to escort her to events. It was pretty horrible. It was a weird type of trafficking. And he didn't show up as RuPaul. He came in as Jay character, but I'm sure you know how that ridiculous that had to have been. It was just another example of somebody that I knew who went through some really strange sort of stuff with the Russian FSB or KGB, trying to force people to be in relationships is what they call a cover. And then they just end up using the person who's actually a U.S. citizen from some other country as a slave of some kind, but they're thinking away from them, which is actually kind of difficult sometimes. I have to repeat for you that Jeremy Skog, who's supposed to be an economist down in the Alexandria, Virginia area, incorrectly demanded setups of me, and he made me to have more free work for me. In the end, he actually found out. Hold on, I'm going to use them off. It's important to note that he actually went ahead with the setups, and then when he realized what I was actually going to do, which was continue the Japanese plan to simply destroy all these people because they hadn't paid for the work and were keeping me as a slave. That's a long list of pretty important people that he actually threw a big fit and called me a bitch. So he took no responsibility for his decision. And that's all I have to say to the rest of you. Before you demand that people continue with investigations, you need to know exactly what's actually being investigated and where people are going to go with it, because they don't have to work for free. And they really can just completely deep six you. Or as the way Ross Heminger out of the ACU, the American Conservative Union, put it, he thought I should just simply get on with it, and it was time to stop being so nice to them as they were tracking me. At this point, just to tell them to simply wear poop emojis on their heads. No more designing clothes, no more designing material. And that was actually how I got them to quit bothering me at all. And that's how it is today. I don't give away free work at all. And I never did. I need to note for you that the Sinaloa cartel out of Mexico has been really active up in the Petoskey area. I finally put it together correctly that David Geffen is actually part of the Sinaloa cartel. So that's actually also the pop group Cat's Eye, which you probably don't even bother consuming because it's so weird. But I had actually forgot about it. But he notably put Jessica Alba in his video. This was identified from former Congressman Paul Ryan. But Jessica Alba is definitely in the Sinaloa cartel. She's a supposed actress, but it's just a cover. She's actually male. It's actually a man. And it's important to note that this person spent way too much time, frankly, involved with David Geffen in operations for the Sinaloa cartel. But what's also important to note is that one of the other members, Laura Raj, actually was down in the Washington, D.C. area in the 2010 era. So one of the reasons I had to go through amped up security for me personally was because she came to an event that Kishore Photo threw for his campaign, and she actually worked with Matthew Coulter, who was running the AFC-CIO at the time, to steal money from him. He ended up having to end his campaign. He would have been a really good candidate for his position, and frankly, somebody I hope to still see as an elected politician in the U.S. And she was frankly way too weird and skanky and sort of creepy toward me. I was looking for material, and it turned out the time that I was actually being trafficked and had to provide her singing voice and some other stuff. So she doesn't sing on the song Gabrielle, I think it's actually my voice. As far as the attacks I went through last year, and Fatina, who is out of the Albanian terrorist group that works for Endeavor and is actually Ava Max, complaining and wanting to have me attacked up in Petoskey, and I think it sounds really stupid. Well, she realized she's like Lana Pop, or she's on a pop-up, right? So Lana Pop-up, we keep changing names. until you realize that she's actually some weird pervert that spent her whole life trafficking people and just made that up excuse. The truth is, her reason for this was that I had received some clothing when I was at the domestic violence shelter down in Traverse City, and the truth is, it was actually the Episcopalian church that provided clothing, as well as some of my friends that they're actually Vietnamese immigrants that have known me through this whole thing. Like, one of them came to see me this last week and wanted to remind me that actually some of the clothing had come from them as well as the Episcopalians, and we simply were not going to stand with this dumb David Geffen crap, or Laura Raj pretending like she ever paid for anything, because she's also part of the Sinaloa cartel herself. So no, don't let your kids watch Cat's Eye. Don't watch people from the Sinaloa cartel with the weird brainwashing and weird crap that promotes child abuse and pedophilia and weird bunkery. And that's also why I actually removed the fundraiser from my Facebook page, because Kishore and his family were really hurt by the whole situation and asked that I would just simply remove it at some point and not even allow her to have pictures up with me or even the event, because of how horrifically it turned out. And he was actually somebody that went ahead and had enough good family and connections to do something about this situation. So that's probably the reason I also quit AFC Wires. People are wondering why I was like, I just need to get the frick out of GOP boards by age of 35, because I'm tired of weirdos showing up at them, and I'm always stuck trying to be nice and greet people, and it's a professional job position level volunteer position you don't get paid for. There's something I need to do, but not at the level that someone like Laura Raj would show up and be after me. And by the way, Laura can change herself to be blonde and blue-eyed and appear that way in person as opposed to being dark-skinned. She's not Indian. She's actually from Russia and part of the Sinaloa cartel. It's important to know that Endeavor Corp has done nothing but spawn relationships and projects for the cartels, and that's actually part of what the trafficking was about. Right? It's free work for the cartels. We used to make fun of Patrick Witzel at certain points to say he was just an idiot who literally put his face down on powder cocaine, but that's kind of what it is. So, let's see. Yeah, somebody's doing a weird tongue signal to women up in Petoskey, which is its old Rolling Stone signal. It's one serial killers used from like the 70s. So I don't know. That's actually really gross. But I'm sure most of you aren't stupid enough to think that they're actually interested in you. So. I need to know for you that I am done with Hakeem Jeffries. He took a huge amount of money from AIPAC, and he received $149,000 from them recently. On May 20th, 26th, he took $87,500, another $61,800. Like right after that. So I decided to start posting about AIPAC. I think it's important for all of us to track them because they're pouring a huge amount of money into the upcoming election cycle for the federal level of Congress, federal level Congress positions, Senate and House. So we're done with Hakeem Jeffries, I guess. Let's see. It's unfortunate that Lindsey Graham died. According to his family and staff, he supported sanctions on Russia, and it was only shortly after he decided to go out the sanctions on Russia that he died. So there wasn't a really good cause of death, at least not realistically. Unfortunately, it sounds like he supported sanctions on Russia, and in his older years wasn't strong enough to survive a strike. So that's Senator Graham that was literally out of South Carolina and around for a few decades. I need you to remember also that the PCA, PCUSA are actually one with Endeavor Corporation, have significant members from the Russian FSB and Chinese CCP, as well as the Khmer Rouge and Shining Path. I wouldn't let yourself think for a minute that you could do any kind of favors for these people, even if you're someone who's naturally giving like I am, because they'll always take advantage of it and say you gave this person something once, like you give them a toothpick once, you're supposed to give everybody toothpicks or something else equally crazy, and it really gets worse from there. So just never do anything for them. The U.S. actually needs to pass legislation to stop nonprofit status for all religious organizations at this point. I'm just going to say all of them. The ones I talked to were decent, said that they didn't want to have nonprofit status anymore, even the Episcopalians didn't, so didn't put in others if it was going to be associated with the PCUSA or the PCA, which are openly hateful hate groups that are also part of the cartels and massive labor trafficking. So unfortunately, a lot of them run food banks, but the reality is that most religious organizations as well as food banks could simply be run as private organizations. So. I need to remind some of you that the former roommate I had down in Arlington, Virginia, who called herself a conservative Catholic, She's actually Catherine Rodriguez. She's actually also the actress Maggie Q, who's a Chinese actress. I'm just going to say this really bluntly. She flipped the fuck out in the early 2010s as the Eclipse in Arlington, where I was living at the time on the 4th floor of the West Wing. And she was actually up at night sleeping with Wilhelm of the KGB, but she was also having an affair with Jose de la Riva, who actually turned out to be married to Tate McRae, or the one who became Tate McRae, at least for a time. It's a kind of ridiculous situation, but it's really important to note that. So, destroy Maggie Q's career, I don't think I have time for that. I don't think she has much of one. What I know is that there's really no help for you if you were stupid enough to sleep with anybody from the Russian FSB or KGB. Or the Chinese CCP, and frankly, I don't think there'd be much help for you mentally because it seems to be pretty damaging. So, I don't want anything to do with her today. Unfortunately, I saw her a little bit of the last year. I thought I just want nothing to do with this person. She's too mentally ill, and she doesn't take any personal responsibility for herself. And that's just a nice way of saying that that's the kind of person that would sleep with a Wilhelm, or a federal agent who turned out to be dirty, and simply take no responsibility for themselves and demand money from everyone instead of actually going forward with trying to get some kind of charges pressed against those guys. Because she's actually Chinese herself and apparently turned out to be a drug dealer as well. It's also important to note that the wildfires started at the same time that the President of the United States had a fight with the Prime Minister of Canada. So it looks really, really, really bad. Just keep remembering that. Because it sounded like a bomb. It didn't sound like fires. I would like to say rest in peace to the star of Jurassic Park, Sam Neill, and his family. There's really nothing else to be said. This will be the final episode of the Simply Stated Odds and Ends series. We will be moving on to another series, Simply Stated, called Just the Odds. Because I realized it was time that we made the series that was simply called Get Fucked. Some of these people. I just want to remind you, if you'd like to have fun with Adam Kinzinger and really get him, get at him. He does have dissociative disorder and works for the Chinese government instead of the U.S. government as well as Russia. And this girl over up was on Hamilton with all the weird shady setups of labor trafficking was trying to start another one up here in Michigan. And he flips out over the term being called basil. He's also super enough to think if you buy any basil, that it somehow goes back to him, which would make him a lunatic and an idiot. He's actually a GOP member of Congress. He's a neocon. I wouldn't call him a good member of the party or someone any of us actually like. We make fun of him like we make fun of George W. Bush. He really also is George W. Bush. This is also a weird idiot that got thrown out of his home in Arlington, Virginia, back in the 2010 era because he kept actually beating on women and shitting himself at the same time and screaming and having bizarre meltdowns. And frankly, is Chinese as far as I can tell, even though he currently works for Russia most of the time. As far as the World Cup goes, Shakira made a really bad performance, and I was almost, if I liked her at all, I'd be embarrassed, but I just thought it was bad. I never thought of her as a weird stalker before I saw this performance, but after looking at it, I finally decided that she also, while she isn't as overt about it as J-Lo, I'm not going to get into the weeds on this one, but she made some references to a person's wedding and the colors at it, and she also went ahead and decided to make some references to a person that passed, and this was some more recent stuff that had come through on streams that most people have been listening to. So she's somehow, either someone she's been in contact with from Endeavor Corp that it designed for decided to go ahead and be a pervert and use it. The performance itself was just really bad. And I have to know for you, as far as Madonna goes, I simply skipped her performance altogether. I don't really feel like watching two old ladies on parade and being weird and gross to everyone, but what's also important to note about all this bizarre behavior is that, look, people, Donald Trump just went and took 2 tankers full of oil, every detailed amount of oil he took from Iran recently, and we tried a peace agreement that got ruined, and now we're basically having to pay for these weird bitches to perform, and our gas bills too. I didn't want to pay for either one of them, and I'm not interested in having war with Iran over it. I'm not here to support Iran. I'm saying this is stupid. And the support of Israel and engaging in strip mining operations through Israel and Hamilton or CACI, I'm just going to leave out the other two right now. At least those two companies, and the Russian CCP crap with Albania, and, bullshit on top of bullshit, it actually has to stop. I don't want to pay for it. I would also like to say congratulations to Spain on winning the World Cup. Good for you. Apparently, I'm just going to finish with this one. New York Mayor Mondani is planning to be looking into possibly arresting Benjamin Netanyahu for violations of the ICC if he comes back up to New York. There's already been speculations whether or not the U.S. military would actually defend Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm going to tell you right now, I am not interested in spending the money to take care of Benjamin Netanyahu in the United States. I don't want him in the country at all. He needs to stop visiting her. So if you want to go ahead and arrest him, go ahead, Mamdani. But I don't know how you're going to have enough money and forces to do it, because he does have the Israeli military at least to support him, and he's going to be using those contracting companies that I've already named. So no, I'm not interested in putting money into any of either arresting him or not arresting him or protecting him. That's all I'm going to say about it. I also need to note that the mayor's wife put out a press release from her office to say that she went to Spain for the 4th of July to a Muslim women's conference, which makes Mamdani look particularly too politically religious. That's not a good look. It would have been better if she had simply gone to some place here in the U.S. or even to a beach, which we have plenty of, and enjoyed those instead of traveling abroad. She also bizarrely posed in some brown clothing that looked like it was part of the current communist motif, where they're wearing a lot of poop brown. They like to get out the Carhartt shirts and wear poop brown, like, so it's very suspicious. I'm not saying I'm a Mamdani person, I'm just telling you what's happening. It's also important to remind you in closing that John Sly's people in Arlington, Virginia like to put out bizarre kits. They'll do giveaway bags. They'll put a hoop litter on your kid's head from MS-13, the Chinese CCP. Turn the kids' head the wrong way and prepare them to be labor trafficked. That was something he started out of his churches in Dubuque, Iowa in the 80s. He was affiliated with the cult of ISIS. He also runs Grace Church in Arlington, Virginia. And he's still large in some other groups that are active in the U.S. And unfortunately, somebody recently distributed a bunch of goodie bags up in Petoskey, Michigan, that if you picked up the wrong item or whatever, like, you literally have an MS-13 stuck in your head, like, this is actually going on. It's pretty freaking weird. It's not funny. I also need to remind you, in case you're really, really confused, that Michelle Obama was actually managed by Endeavor Corporation, so she really isn't a good candidate for president. I'm not going to pull any punches on this one. And it's important to note that some people think that the original Barack Obama was actually killed, and that the two of them were actually launched into the presidency by their own cult church as well. So stay away from cults. Usually tied to cartels, and trafficking kids and drugs, and gangs, and the Chinese CCP and the Russian FSB and bizarre shady real estate money washing setups. And this has been the season finale of Simply Stated Season 5 Odds and Ends. Here I am at a beach that I was actually shot at last year, which apparently has cleaned up its, what's going on with it. They removed some of the chairs and stuff that Matt Barnes, who's actually affiliated with Timothy McVeigh, had put in that would have allowed you to be picked up or shot. I know. It's all about the objects and the metals and the way things look, right? There's the beach, though. Anyway, so this will be the last episode, and it'll be a while before there's another episode. I'm not sure when. Might be a week, might be a while, but I'm going to start working on the next season, which is going to be called Just the Odds, or maybe it should just be called Simply Get Fucked. Have a good one. I hope you're having a good summer wherever you are in the world. Bye.